Welcome to our podcast, Aging is a Trip, where we take a candid but lighthearted look at all aspects of aging and retirement. You'll learn some things, you'll be intrigued, and at times you'll even be amused. I'm your host, Brad Breeding, and for the last 10 years I've been the president of MyLifeSite.net, an online company that guides people through complex senior living decisions. Now, with this podcast, I want to help elevate society's perspectives and understanding of age-related matters, past, present, and future. Now, let's enjoy the show. Welcome, everyone. My guest today is Michele Holleran. She holds a PhD in Organization and Management from Capella University and an MBA from the Pennsylvania State University, otherwise known as Penn State. Michele is the founder of two firms, Holleran Consulting, a full-service research firm offering satisfaction studies, leadership assessments, and community wellness profiles, and DeArmond Consulting, specializing in strategic planning, organizational health, and leadership development. Much of the work done by Michele and her organizations has been within the senior living space, where she's been sought out by leading organizations to head up numerous task forces, forums, and much more over the last 20 plus years. So, Michele, thank you so much for joining. Welcome.
Thank you, Brad. I'm delighted to be here.
Well, I want to go ahead and get to the really important stuff. I guess I should ask, are you a Nittany Lion fan?
Yes, I am.
I did not realize until I'd always wondered where Nittany Lion came from. And before this interview, I looked it up and I learned that there apparently is a mountain, a Nittany Mountain, I guess, or near campus. Is that?
Yes, that's true. Uh-huh.
Okay. So it's a mountain lion that lives in the Nittany Mountains.
I've never seen one, but I hear tale of it.
Okay, well, that's probably just as well. So I know you do obviously a lot of work in the aging services space. Tell me a little bit about your journey, Michele. What led you to the business of resident engagement and satisfaction surveys, among the other types of work that you do?
Well, I started working in this field over 30 years ago. I was working at the time with a marketing firm, and we were doing work with a small community called Cornwall Manor, still a client. Cornwall Manor is where my grandma lived. And so I was working with them doing marketing, and I had told my mom and dad about Cornwall Manor and what a beautiful place it was in Pennsylvania. And so Grandma lived there. And I've always been really, really close to my grandparents and have had a great affinity for older adults. And now that I am one, I continue to be very interested in this. But 30 years ago, when I was a younger person, it was something that was very attractive to me. And in my marketing work, Brad, I did some consulting for organizations who were applying for the Malcolm Baldrige Quality Award. So I was very active in the quality movement, TQM as we used to call it back in those days. Okay. And I was a great fan of Tom Peters, who wrote In Search of Excellence. And of course, he talked a lot about the voice of the customer and how important that was. And back in the 80s, that was just beginning to be a notion that was catching fire because people realized that quality was more about the consumer experience than it was, about other things. So I think it was starting to catch on back then. And I believed that in addition to the manufacturing sector gaining some credibility from this movement, that the senior living organizations could as well. So that's what stimulated me to start Holleran back in 1992, after I had delved into this a little bit more. And I felt like it was going to be a wonderful thing for our organizations. But I have to tell you, Brad, at the time, it was fairly controversial. I went to a meeting of the PAMFA group, which is now Leading Age Pennsylvania back then, and we're going back a long time now. And I started talking about this idea of getting feedback on how satisfied residents were with their campuses and their CCRCs. And I could tell that the people in the audience weren't too enthusiastic about what I was proposing. And I asked them point blank, what's the trouble here? Why aren't you resonating with this message? And a couple of them raised their hands and said, you know, we think that we know what's best for the residents. And so that was the attitude of some back in the day. But I am happy to report that most of our organizations today fully embrace the idea of getting feedback from their customers who are residents.
I'm not surprised that some of the communities pushed back on that. I mean, anytime there's a new idea and that idea feels like it's kind of getting, kind of crossing over those sort of protective barriers that maybe organizations put around their residents, I can see where that would be uncomfortable. But here we are 30 years later, and I know that you have a very successful business doing that. And in fact, now residents and the organizations love to be able to report what they're finding. So you've come a long ways, and I know the industry appreciates that. So I noticed that you don't refer to your satisfaction surveys only as satisfaction surveys. Instead, it says satisfaction and engagement surveys, or engagement and satisfaction surveys. So can you tell me a little bit about the difference? What's the engagement piece?
Well, the easiest way to explain this, Brad, is by going to an old psychology concept called Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which I know that you and many of your listeners are familiar with. This is the idea that there are lower level needs and higher level needs that we as humans expect to fill. Excuse me. The lower level needs I equate to things like food and shelter, and those are typically things that have been asked on resident satisfaction surveys. You know, things like the temperature of the food is appropriate, the quality of the food is good, the variety of the food is satisfactory. Right. Those are satisfaction oriented questions, and they're important. There's no doubt about it. But in addition to that, today's consumer, today's resident, really wants a different quality of experience. They're looking for something different. And the types of things they're looking for is to be able to have a voice and engage with their community that way, to have connection with others, to be fulfilled with their life goals, and to have well-being. And these are correlated to the top of the pyramid on Maslow's hierarchy: self-fulfillment, self-esteem, things of that nature. And so we decided about 5 years ago that it was time to measure those higher level needs of the resident experience on their campus. And so what we're really doing is trying to assess how satisfied or pleased they are with their successful aging experience. And so that's a whole different ball game, and the quality and the nature of the questions that we measure now for engagement are beyond what we used to measure, which was just satisfaction questions. But having said that, we do recognize that both are important. And for those clients who want to just measure satisfaction, we will still do it that way for them. But we encourage them to start measuring engagement factors because that's what the new consumer really is looking for, that kind of a life experience on campus.
That's really interesting. So this is more of the kind of the holistic lifestyle, the total wellness components, and all those things which help drive purpose. They drive a sense of community. They help drive all of these things that help us to feel good about who we are, no matter what stage of life we're in. But I can imagine those are harder to measure.
Well, yes, I would say that, but I do think that every resident can accurately assess how they are experiencing their campus in terms of their successful aging. In fact, that's why most people choose a CCRC, because they're looking for something that allows them to connect with others, to have a voice, to be fulfilled, and to maintain or improve their well-being. So I think that this engagement stuff has been very timely. And I think that most residents are very eager to share how they feel about their campus's support of their successful aging.
Well, if there's one thing I know that, at our company, we get emails from a lot of folks, prospective residents as well as current residents. And one of the things I hear from time to time from some residents is that they wish they had more of a voice in that community. And there's a lot of different aspects to that. That can be viewed pretty broadly in terms of what that ultimately means, but there's no question, as you indicated, that that's a big deal to residents today. And so that kind of helps, I think, take me where I wanted to go with this. Let's talk a little bit about, uh, you know, there's so much discussion now in the industry about the next generation of retirees, baby boomers, their lifestyle, their preferences, and how that'll be different from previous generations. How to best attract them, industry providers, CCRCs, life plan communities. How do we attract this next generation? So you have a lot of insight into that. What are you seeing in terms of generational preferences over the years? What are you seeing today? And you've touched on this a little bit, but how does the next generation, what are they going to be looking for as compared to previous generations?
Well, we're already experiencing this at our CCRCs, our life plan communities across the country. I talk with leadership teams all the time, and what I hear from them is that there is a new breed of resident out there. The silents, of course, are still on campuses, and they tend to be much more willing to go along with the historic policies of the campus. They aren't quite as interested in voicing their opinions. They are often happy to leave the day-to-day operations to the administrative personnel on campus. And then there are folks who I believe kind of bridge the two generations. They act a little bit more like the boomer generation does. And these folks are the ones who do expect to have a voice. They often are highly active on their campuses, and they want to make a contribution, and they want to make their opinions heard. And so I believe that that morphing of generations has already occurred on campus. So many of the residents today that populate the life plan communities are very, very active in their own communities. They've been active in their careers. That's not to say the silents haven't, but it's just a general difference in the culture and the history that they grew up with. And so there's an expectation now among many residents, especially those that skew a little younger, to be more involved and to have that voice. And this gets into some delicate territory, Brad,
Mm-hmm.
because while it's certainly true that residents, this is their home. They want to be looked at as investors, not renters, and that the residents' rights movement has been very profound over the last, 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we are at a phase where that transition process has already started.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're going to see more residents on our campuses who behave more like the boomer population. And the generational differences are interesting. However, I don't think they're quite as clear cut as age and when you were born. It's more about a psychographic profile and what was our growing up experience and what influenced our behaviors and our beliefs and our values. And so I think it's more dependent on that than just when you were born.
Sure, sure, that makes sense. You can't just draw a line in the sand and say everybody over this age has a different mentality than anybody on the other side of it. But
Right.
yeah, but I think the industry, is going to really, and they're already starting to clearly, but I would say some perhaps are embracing this maybe more quickly than others, and I think the industry as a whole is going to have to embrace the resident the resident voice movement in order to. I think that's going to be a key to success going forward.
Yes, and I know many, many CEOs and leadership teams that have already readily embraced this, and they welcome it. And a good example is Kendall at Oberlin, one of our clients who, we track what they do regularly. I'm personal friends with Barbara Thomas, who is the CEO of that organization of Kendall at Oberlin. And she is very much embracing the voice of residents. In fact, Barbara and her team selected a resident to help them spearhead their whole strategic planning effort because this individual had that in his skill set from his past work life. And so they very much valued that and asked him to come on board as one of the leaders of that initiative. So I think you'll see it happening more and more, and I think it's already happened on many of our campuses.
Embracing that is so important, not only because it helps that resident to feel better about living there, but because the industry or that organization can learn from those residents, their backgrounds, their skills, their expertise, their knowledge, their wisdom, and listening. And this is true, as you know, with your experience from any organization. Listening to the customer is important, but I think it's really, really important in senior living because this is residents. That's their home. That's where they're living. That's their life. And the organization needs to make sure that they are making that as good as they can for that individual. Now, on a previous podcast, I was fortunate to have Dr. Karen Wilson on, and she, as you may know, but she essentially developed the concept of assisted living as we know it today. And I asked her kind of about her journey over the years and how that concept evolved. And one of the first things she mentioned was the most important thing is listening to residents, because that's where the key to success is. And that's what I love about what you do. So, talking about some of the trends that you're seeing in your surveys, and again, I think we've touched on some of this already, but if there were two or three things that really stand out across the board in terms of what's most important, residents' voice obviously is one, but beyond that, specifically, are there one or two things that really stand out that's just incredibly important to residents now?
Well, I think that residents really seek connection with the greater community. And, they are welcoming opportunities to volunteer and to remain vital in a larger context. And of course, in this day and age of COVID, that becomes very challenging for everyone, not just residents. But I would say that there is a desire, especially at this time in life, to give back. And there are many, many opportunities and ways to do that, both on campus and off campus. So I would say that that's probably something that, it is really important. The other thing I would say is on the well-being side. We used to have a very restrictive view of what it meant to be well. And thanks to the efforts of so many, that has really been expanded to the many, many dimensions of wellness and what is involved in that. And I think that residents, as well as these campuses, are really embracing a much broader definition of what well-being means. I think that residents are very, very intentional about wanting to utilize the last third of their lives or so doing something that's bigger than themselves. And they want to connect to a campus that is working in the larger context of the community. And that's why we've had some good success working with communities and campuses on senior community profiles, which are trying to assess what the needs of the greater community are among the senior population, and to be able to offer some ways to connect the residents who are on campus with those who are off campus. And so I think that that has become much more of a trend than it has in the past, where maybe things were a bit more insular. And I think this recognition that the external community and its importance is something that I have seen over the past several years.
Yeah, I think it sounds like sort of the transition that we're seeing is away from this idea that we're going to, residents will move into this community and that's just kind of their world, to really moving into a community where now they're a part of something. They're a part of a bigger community that can actually affect change within the broader community. They want to continue doing. They want to continue making a difference.
Life plan communities are starting to recognize that although their first obligation always is to their own residents, that as we grow and develop as a field, to look more broadly. And I think this is maybe a microcosm of what we're seeing out in the greater world today, that we feel more like we are global citizens as opposed to just being insular. And so I think that these trends are kind of mirroring one another.
Yeah, it's that, I don't mean to keep talking about my previous podcast, but it just reminded me of my last guest. We talked about the concept of neighbors, what a neighbor really is, and how that's years ago, generations ago, it was viewed differently. It wasn't even whether you like a person or don't like a person. It was just, that's your neighbor. I mean, and that's where a real community comes from. And now I think, what you're talking about is this bigger worldview of, extending that idea of neighbor beyond just that organization to the broader community. As we wrap up here, as you go in and you do these satisfaction surveys, the organization, particularly if it's the first one they've done, they're probably going to learn a whole lot. I mean, how are the results of your surveys actionable? What are some ways that the community takes that information and then actually implement certain things to address maybe some shortcomings or areas where they could improve?
Well, the first way they use the findings is to affirm that they're doing a pretty good job. I mean, I look at the overall database, and we have the largest not-for-profit senior living CCRC database. And so I like to look at the overall results, and I can tell you that our life plan communities are doing an exceptional job overall. Mm-hmm. That allows them to build on that success and to really home in on those areas where they might have some opportunity for improvement. And that's why I believe that not only the quantitative data is illuminating, but also the qualitative survey comments that we get on our surveys, which are extensive. And they will subsequently do focus groups, either have us come in or they'll do them themselves with residents to learn more and to understand what can we really do to make improvements. In essence, our survey results provide them with a report card. Not only because we give them their scores, but we contrast those scores against other life plan communities across the country, and that's really valuable. And then they will resurvey either, several months later, just those factors that they felt they wanted to track, or they'll do a full survey. We have a portal that we use, Brad, that allows them to slice and dice data any way they would like. And so it really allows them to figure out, for instance, that residents who have lived there between 2 and 4 years are the most dissatisfied with the food service, and then to try to learn why that particular subgroup isn't as happy.
Well, this has been great. I have learned a lot, and again, really, really appreciate your time for doing this. So thank you for all the wonderful work that you're doing, Michele. I know certainly your clients appreciate it, and I know all the residents out there do as well. Thanks for joining us for this episode of Aging is a Trip. We'll have more episodes coming your way soon, so stay tuned.